Now, you may well have noticed that I've been away on holiday over the last week, and I have to say I'm pretty thankful that not too much happened at Liverpool in my absence. Of course, apart from the fact that they completed a £116 million signing of Florian Wirtz, agreed a deal with Bournemouth for Milos Kerkez, sold Jarell Quansah to Bayer Leverkusen, and of course, interest emerged in Crystal Palace defender Marc Guehi. Apart from that, seems like it's been pretty serene. So I'm glad that I'm back anyway, so that the real stuff can start. And by the real stuff, I mean the stuff that I actually get the chance to cover. In terms of what that is, well, I want to take a little bit of a deep dive into those Guehi links. Of course, it is my understanding that he is a player of interest to Liverpool this summer, and they're exploring what the conditions of a deal would be like to bring the Crystal Palace defender to Anfield as a potential replacement for Jarell Quansah. So why is that the case? Why is he a player that Liverpool like? Well, as usual, I've done a big look into the numbers behind the player and dragged out some graphs and some statistics that I think are really, really interesting, and hopefully give you a bit of an insight into the player. I always say do the eye test as well, go and watch some clips, and he's a fantastic player. But I want to look at the numbers as well to give us a more kind of rounded view of Guehi. So I'm going to take a look into those. Now, before I do that, it's always worth it as a starting point, really looking into the basics of why Liverpool would be interested. And I think they're quite obvious, really, in this case. I mean, you're looking at a 24-year-old player here with 132 Premier League appearances to his name already. He is, of course, homegrown, 23 England caps, and crucially he's into the last year of his contract with Crystal Palace, so there's real potential there to kind of get a bit of a bargain. But is he any good? Well, obviously yes, he is. Anyone who's watched him can tell you that. But here's a look at kind of why in the numbers, and I'll start as always when we're talking about a defender with the defensive aspects. And I think one thing I want to say here, really, when you're looking at Guehi and you're assessing him, is that he's played largely left side of a back three. So of course, when you're a centre half in a back three, you are a little bit more protected. There are more numbers around you to help you defend, and that can make your life a little bit easier. But it also means that, you know, if you are on the wide sides of that back three, that at times you get pulled into those wide areas to defend almost as a fullback at times. And we know, although Liverpool defend in a back four, they need the centre halves to do that a lot because they push the fullbacks on an awful lot, don't they? Trent Alexander-Arnold previously we saw coming into midfield or being in an advanced position to affect things in the final third. I think that kind of approach is going to continue, isn't it, with the Kerkez there, who likes to get up and down. Frimpong very much. Bradley still likes to do that as well. So they're going to ask him to do a lot of that, Guehi, if he does sign for Liverpool. So it's interesting that he's kind of used to that and has maybe shown that in a back three. Now, as you expect, when I looked into the defensive statistics, obviously I talk about this a lot, but the volume stats he rates very, very highly on, because of course Palace do a lot more defending than Liverpool, don't they? So he gets more opportunity to do those things. So I always want to look at the ratios of how they're winning tackles, winning challenges, winning the duels in games. And so I think that gives you a better idea of just how good of a defender they are, because if you get into a challenge with a centre forward, how likely are you to kind of come out and win that? So I want to show you, and I think the best place to start really is a comparison with Liverpool's two starting centre halves last season. And there's some really interesting stuff in here actually in this graphic. And you know, you look there, start with the challenges won overall, and 65.7% is not bad at all. It's on the higher end, really. Quite close to Canate, who was on 70.5. This is over the course of the last Premier League season. And of course, Virgil van Dijk, he's a freak, really, isn't he? 74.2% in terms of challenges won. It's unfair, really, to compare anyone to him, isn't it? He's the best centre-half in the world by a long chalk, I would say. So the fact that Guehi's, you know, rates quite highly up against Canate there, I would say, is fairly encouraging. Again, you move on to the tackle success rate. Again, he's lower than both of those, 54.8% versus Canate's 60.6%. And again, Van Dijk out on his own, just not marginally ahead of Canate on this one, 61.4%. But again, I think you're looking at Guehi there, he's not a million miles away, and he's probably, in terms of the volume, he's doing a lot more of it. So there's more opportunities for that ratio to be dragged down, of course. So you know, I think that's not, you know, his numbers there don't look too bad at all. Of course, when we're talking about Guehi, there's one major red flag that everybody's probably rightly been pointing out about him, and I have to focus on it here, really, and it's aerial duels. And you can see there is a little bit of a concern there in the numbers. I mean, 46.6% of his aerial duels won in the Premier League last season versus 64.7 for Konate and 75.8 for Van Dijk. Like I say, almost take him out, but look at the difference there to Konate. He's miles behind, really, Guehi, isn't he? There's no kind of sugarcoating it, really. That is a clear weakness of him, his ability to compete with centre forwards or forwards of any kind, really, in the air. You know, he's kind of younger, he can get better, but it's very, very hard to see a very sudden improvement coming in terms of this as he moves forward in his career, because he's kind of 5'11", 6 foot. I mean, that's no slight, that's fairly tall, isn't it? I'm not 6 foot, but of course also I'm not a Premier League centre half, so it doesn't really matter that much to me, to be honest, to be 6 foot. You know, he is on the shorter side for centre halves, and that can allow him, when he's up against those taller centre forwards, to get dominated aerially. In fact, you know, he's a player who's been linked with Liverpool for an awful long time. I have to say, I've kind of dismissed it out of hand, really, some of these links, because I know in the past they've been so obsessed with buying centre halves who are aerially dominant. So you know, the idea is that they press from the front. Liverpool, they're very aggressive, and the result of that is that the long balls come in, that the opposition empty it almost, and then you have to have people who are capable of stopping them, using their centre forward as a kind of leverage point to play off. You've got to win those challenges, and that's how you create pressure. You squeeze them in, and that's the idea. So it made sense for Liverpool to have aerially dominant centre halves on both sides, really. So you know, Guehi doesn't look like he has a strength there, but I would say, I think it's really interesting this. I feel like things are changing in terms of what Liverpool's approach is here and what they want from the centre halves. You know, you look at Dean Howson was a player that they looked at this summer, wasn't he? And he was kind of on the lower side of aerial duels, although better than Guehi in this aspect. And I just wonder, you know, with them being okay about this and being happy to go forward with Guehi, if they can make the deal work, was this a bit more of a Jurgen Klopp obsession? Did he want aerially dominant centre halves on both sides, and he wasn't, you know, that was a number one aspect for him when he was looking at centre halves to sign for his team? I mean, you look, Joe Gomez, for example, was a Michael Edwards signing rather than maybe a Jurgen Klopp signing. And you know, you look at that season when he played an awful lot when Liverpool won the Premier League in 2019-20, and he won only 36% of his aerial duels in the Premier League. So, you know, maybe we're looking at the idea that this recruitment staff's not so much bothered. Maybe they want one aerially dominant centre half, and then the one alongside them can be the guy who kind of clears up a little bit. You know, the guy who is more interested in intercepting or dropping off to maybe challenge for a second ball if the aerial duel bounces their way. I just wonder if that's something that they're leaning towards now, really. You know, creating kind of partnerships where one is more dominant, which of course for the next couple of years will be Van Dijk, or next couple of years at the very least, and the other is the guy who kind of cleans up behind them. It's an interesting one, because we've seen that sort of partnership thrive an awful lot in the Premier League down the years, but it hasn't been something we've seen a lot at Liverpool recently. It's all been about both of them have to win headers. So it's an interesting one, really, and I just think it hints at maybe a change there, because I don't think Guehi would maybe have been a signing that would have been made under Klopp with those numbers, but clearly things are changing, and it's very hard to predict, I have to say, after how this recruitment staff will act, having become so used to it down the years. So you know, like I say, I don't think Guehi would have been targeted at all, because that is a clear weakness and something that Liverpool, if they do sign him, would have to mitigate. So of course, it's not just about defending for players who play in defence for Liverpool, is it? They've got to be good in all the other aspects as well. So what is he like on the ball? Well, Guehi is right-footed, but he can use both really well. I think that's kind of a prominent aspect of his game, actually. He's on that left-hand side as a right footer, and you'd think at times that would really kind of cut off his angles, but he's very good at creating them because he's quite comfortable on both feet. Maybe wouldn't say two-footed, but he's not a million miles away from that. He is very comfortable passing the ball on the left, which is why, you know, it makes it harder for it to press him. He's very, very comfortable in this aspect. And I like a comparison actually with Konate in the possession aspect to give you a good idea, really. And you can see kind of here that the first thing when you compare the two in terms of what they do in possession is that he doesn't pass the ball as frequently as Konate. So Konate's using the ball a lot more often, but this is maybe something we would expect. This is kind of the numbers being a little bit dirty, because you look last season in the Premier League is that Liverpool had 57.7% possession on average, the second best in the Premier League, whereas Palace had 42.8%, which puts them 17th in the Premier League. So of course, for Marc Guehi, he's getting fewer opportunities to pass. He's not passing the ball as much as Konate, so that is to be expected, and that's team effects. He would see a lot more of the ball, of course, than if he were to come into the Liverpool team. And you can also see from these numbers as well, he actually gives the ball away more, which again is not so much of a surprise, really. I think it's team effects there. Konate, when he gets the ball, his job is to keep it, isn't it? It's usually to give it to Trent Alexander-Arnold to get it up the pitch, or give it to Van Dijk to get it up the pitch and keep it circulating. He's asked to be safe, isn't he? Whereas I think for Guehi, because Palace are not a possession side, they're very much counter-attacking, he's getting asked a lot more to be vertical in his passing, try riskier stuff, try and fire it through the lines. If it doesn't work, it's fine, we'll get into our shape again and defend. So it's not a surprise that he's both passing a lot less than Konate, but also passing a lot less in a safe way than Konate. So there's real team effects on those numbers, I would say. But I think the interesting part here, when you look at that comparison in terms of what they do in possession, is that despite the fact that Guehi's got all those team effects affecting him in the number of passes he's allowed to make and how he passes the ball, you can still see that progressive passes and carries are kind of at a similar level, and that is quite surprising for a team that doesn't have anywhere near as much possession. So he's clearly showing a lot of quality in terms of that, in a worse team in terms of possession. I think that's quite impressive, really. And I think what you can also see is a kind of unique Guehi quality here in that in these possession statistics, in that he's the 80th percentile for all defenders for successful take-ons, and I think that's really impressive. I mean, particularly as a lot of the players who would show up well, or defenders that would show up well in that aspect, would maybe be kind of fullbacks, really. So for him, that comparison, he's showing up well amongst centre-halves there for successful take-ons. So, it's not something you think about a lot. Maybe a Joel Matip type might do that, really, but not something that, Van Dijk's more of a passer. Konate, not much, doesn't offer an awful lot in terms of carries and progression in his passing or carries. As I say, there's team effects helping him out there. Guehi, that's a clear quality that he's got that he would bring, and actually the reason he's so good in terms of successful take-ons, or really a kind of illustration of this, really, is his dribbles across the last Premier League season. It really underlines just how good he is at this aspect of the game, and surprisingly so for a centre-half. I mean, look at that graphic, so much green on there, isn't there? He's just, he's very, very good at it, as I say, and bringing the ball forward and dribbling. Very much kind of, as I say, maybe a Joel Matip type in that regard, probably even better at it. Really, in terms of how he does it, it's very, very impressive. There's a lot of wingers who would like a dribble map that looked like that, to be honest, and that's coming from a centre half. And then you kind of look at a chart actually for not just what you can do with dribbling, which obviously he's stand out in, but also in terms of creating. And this is a comparison with other Premier League centre halves, and you can see he's right up there. He's dribbling, but he's also creating. He's doing things at the end of those dribbles to make Crystal Palace a threat in possession. You can see Konate's kind of close to the red line there, and then Van Dijk further left. So as I said, Van Dijk not really a dribbler, but he's a very good creator. But you see him with Guehi in terms of both aspects there, in a team that's not as possession dominant, that he's a better dribbler and a better creator than both from centre half. So I do think that's quite an impressive thing about his game, really. And this is kind of backed up in terms of his creativity by the numbers behind him over the last 365 days. So this is compared to top 5 European leagues and players there. He ranks 90th percentile for expected assisted goals from centre half, 88th percentile for shot creating action. So he's really, really good at going forward from centre half. Again, you've got to say he'll get more licence to do that when he's in a back three than a back four. But what Liverpool are looking for is those qualities. He can bring the ability to do that to a back four, and how will it mesh in with us? And Liverpool are very good, you have to say, at kind of judging that, how players will fit into the team. So I think these are really, really kind of impressive numbers on the attacking front if he could apply them to Liverpool and a back four. Of course, as I say, the big test is, can he do it outside of a back three? And also, if he did come to Liverpool, would he really get targeted by teams aerially? But he has played plenty in a back four throughout his career, and I don't feel like, when you watch Guehi, and I've watched him a few times, you're constantly worried about him getting kind of mugged off aerially, or he's finding himself in positions where he's getting absolutely battered by his centre forward. I just haven't seen that a lot, and you speak to any Crystal Palace fans, they'll tell you just how good this guy is as well. So if he was getting constantly beaten for his size, or that was a real issue in his game, they would have seen it a lot and would have been able to spot that and talk about it a lot more, and maybe criticise him for it. And that doesn't seem to happen, and he seems equally convincing when he's for England as well, maybe alongside Harry Maguire, who is more aerially dominant. So that, again, like I say, those partnerships working. So it'd be interesting. As I say, Liverpool's recruitment staff don't tend to make those judgments, or get a lot of those judgments wrong. So it'll be an interesting one. But of course, we've still got some way to go before Marc Guehi becomes a Liverpool player. There's got to be a deal agreed. Let's see what Palace kind of want there. The player himself has got to give the green light to the move. But I think all those statistics kind of show that he's a very, very interesting player, a big talent who's coming towards his prime, and maybe a chance for Liverpool there with his last year of contract to get him on a bit of a kind of cheap one. So we will have to see how that plays out. So I'm going to wrap it up there anyway. Do let me know your thoughts on Guehi as an option. Do you think he would be a good signing? If it's linked to Ibo Konate's uncertain future, how would you think of him, and maybe as a potential replacement? Do let me know your thoughts on that. And anyone who watches him more than I do, always love to hear your thoughts too. But of course, if you can drop me a like and a subscribe, that would be massively appreciated. And I'll see you guys very soon.